going on within the Democratic Party, and that's a good thing. But what I worry about is that in the course of all that soul searching, some Democrats might reach the wrong sweeping conclusions. And there are a lot of issues that fall into that bucket. But one in particular that stuck out to me is transgender rights. Republicans spent hundreds of millions of dollars on anti-trans ads this election cycle, including one that showed Vice President Harris talking about government funding for gender-reaffirming care for prisoners and detainees. If that sounds like a particularly obscure issue, it is, because it applies to a tiny group of people. And it's also a policy that, by the way, was in place during the first Trump presidency. Another one of the lines that ran over and over again in those ads and throughout right-wing media is this idea that America is faced with a crisis of boys playing in girls' sports. Now, these ads created this perception that the issues of trans kids playing sports was dominating schools across the country, which is completely false. Some people got pulled into that argument. I mean, immediately after the election, Congressman Seth Moulton told the New York Times that, quote, Democrats spend way too much time trying not to offend anyone rather than being brutally honest about the challenges many Americans face. I have 2 little girls. I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a male or formerly male athlete. But as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that. And then last weekend, Congressman Moulton came on this network to discuss those comments.
I was just speaking authentically as a dad about one of many issues where I think we're just out of touch with the majority of voters. And I stand by my position. You know, maybe I didn't get all the words exactly right. But the point is that the backlash I've received proves my point that we can't even have these discussions as a party.
Look, reflection is good. But if that were actually an issue at thousands of schools across the country, it would be worthy of a debate. But there are just incredibly few examples of transgender girls playing in youth sports. And when we see those examples, there isn't evidence that these kids are a threat to safety or fairness. When I say few examples, I mean that if you were to count the examples of transgender girls playing youth sports in any single state, the number often rounds to 0. Take Utah. When a transgender athlete ban was passed there in 2022, there was a grand total of one transgender girl playing in youth sports. When South Dakota passed a ban, only 1 transgender girl had competed in high school sports since 2013. In fact, when these bans were making their way through Republican state houses in 2021, legislators in more than 20 states could not cite a single instance in their own state or region where a transgender athlete competing was a problem. And yet, the noise on this issue has been constant. And according to Donald Trump, that is on purpose.
It's amazing how strongly people feel about that. You see, I'm talking about cutting taxes. People go like that. Talk about transgender. Everyone goes crazy. Who would have thought 5 years ago you didn't know what the hell it was?
See, Donald Trump and Republicans have managed to amplify their bad faith attacks to the point that people do have concerns, as misguided and misinformed as those concerns may be. So this is a good time for Democrats to self-reflect about what went wrong and what to do better moving forward. Of course, it absolutely is. But during that process, it's important not to yield to manufactured panic and to align with the actual facts before making sweeping claims. Echoing and adopting the panic from the other side is not leading. It's not meeting people where they are. It's simply falling prey to right-wing propaganda without checking the facts first. We'll be right back.
Uplift the trans community and to memorialize those who have been victims of transphobic violence. But this year's observance comes at an especially difficult time. Just hours after Donald Trump won the presidential election, crisis hotlines that serve LGBTQ plus people reported a staggering uptick in calls. The Trevor Project, a nonprofit that supports LGBTQ plus youth, says it registered a nearly 700% increase in calls, texts, and chat messages the day after the election. It's the end result of a years-long campaign by the Republican Party to demonize the LGBTQ plus community, and especially trans people. And it's far from over. Here's Republican Senator Mark Wayne Mullen earlier today.
The Democrats are spending so much time talking about the scrutiny of President Trump's picks. And yet did we spend this amount of time scrutinizing Biden's pick? I mean, we can talk about Rachel, the Assistant Secretary of HHS. I think that's a pretty controversial pick from whatever pronoun he or she decides to use.
To be very clear, Mullen was asked about the qualifications of Trump's cabinet picks. The question had actually nothing to do with pronouns or gender identity. Now, none of this is new from Republicans, but unfortunately, some Democrats seem to be taking the bait and internalizing the GOP talking point that defending trans rights cost them the election. Days after Trump's victory, Democratic Congressman Tom Suozzi of New York told the New York Times, quote, "I don't want to discriminate against anybody, but I don't think biological boys should be playing in women's sports. Democrats aren't saying that, and they should be," end quote. Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts also chimed in, claiming Democrats are, quote, out of touch on the issue. As he told the Times, "I have 2 little girls. I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a male or formerly male athlete. But as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that." Moulton then doubled down on that view during this interview on MSNBC with Alex Witt.
And I stand by my position. Maybe I didn't get all the words exactly right. But the point is that the backlash I've received proves my point that we can't even have these discussions as a party.
Now, there are many theories as to why Vice President Harris lost, and everyone has their own prescriptions for what the Democratic Party needs to fix in order to better connect with voters. But throwing a marginalized community under the bus, one that is already under attack by the GOP, doesn't seem like the way to do it. And speaking of seeing and connecting with communities, it's worth noting that 86% of LGBTQ plus voters went to the polls and tried to vote Harris into office. In fact, they are an increasingly loyal constituency for Democrats. There's also the fact that Kamala Harris never made trans issues a cornerstone of her presidential campaign. And yet, Republicans spent nearly $215 million on anti-trans ads, many falsely claiming that trans rights would somehow come at the expense of everyone else's rights. Project 2025 is a 900-plus page playbook for the first 180 days of the new Trump administration. And it is literally riddled with proposals to further marginalize the LGBTQ plus community, including and especially trans persons. That means Democrats will have to answer the call and be champions for the community they have for so long claimed to represent.